Hi guys, Jim here with JP Property Consulting. So today's quick tip video, I'm going to go over some tips on creating and adhering to proper screening criteria. This is going to be one of the most important steps you're going to do in making sure that you're having good people living at your property and taking care of your rental property. So first of all, one of the things I stress a lot too in my courses is that we want you to have your screening, you should really have your screening criteria in writing. Have it documented as to what you look for on each step. Okay, so there's steps that you're going to be following when it comes to processing your application. So for example, with the income verification, and make sure I talk about in some of my other classes that you're saying for this section that you're going to do an income verification, not necessarily an employment verification. So because not everybody is employed and not everybody's able-bodied and able to get up and go to work every day. So you don't want to create the image that you're not going to rent to someone simply because they aren't capable of getting up and going to work every day, or if they're an elderly person that's on Social Security. So make sure first and foremost your criteria states that you're going to do an income verification, not an employment verification necessarily. Okay. With that said, have your screening criteria we talked about in writing, and make sure you're going to spell out every step. When you're going to have your criteria in writing, at the very top of your criteria, be sure that you're actually going to have the actual effective date that you're actually starting your screening criteria. So if you later on, so what you want to do is it'll say screening criteria for 123 Johnson Street apartment building, or whatever your place is. And then underneath it, I want you to put the date and the time that you enacted the screening criteria. So that's going to be important, because then later on, let's say, a year down the road or 6 months from now, you decide one day you wake up and you have an epiphany and you decide, I don't think I like the idea that I'm requiring everybody to make 3 times the rent. I want to change it to 3.5 times the rent. You can do that, but just make sure you're going to document on there when that new screening criteria is effective. Save that as a new file with the date and the time, with the date in the file. The file name, and then you have the date and the time at the very top of your screening criteria, so you have it documented when you enacted that screening criteria. That's going to be important, because if down the road, let's say you had somebody who was of a protected class, and they came in and looked at an apartment, and you told them it was 3 times the rent that they had to make, right? And now, let's say a couple days later, after you've had that epiphany, and you decide, let's say you want to go the other direction, and you decide, you're laying in bed one night and you said, I want to make it 2.5 times the rent instead of 3 times the rent. Now, a couple days later, instead of it being somebody who was of a protected class, someone who comes in and maybe they look sort of like me, right? Now, that person comes in and you tell them, oh, my income verification, my criteria is 2.5 times the rent. If those were 2 shoppers, HUD shoppers, it makes it look like you're trying to loosen up the screening criteria because of how I look, right? So make sure you're going to document when you enacted that particular screening criteria. You're going to put the date and the time whenever you change that on there, and then save that as a new file. That's important to do, okay? So we talked about the income verification. Make sure you're going to do that. You specify what you're looking for on your income. So if you want your income verification to be it needs to be sustainable, legal, and verifiable income. Okay, so if you are going to say we don't want your income to be something that's permanent, okay, make sure you're going to specify that in there. This needs to be permanent. This income verification source needs to be permanent. So that, because one of the questions that you're going to send and ask with their employer or with their income source, that is this income sustainable? Is it permanent? Or if they're going to tell you, no, this is going to end in 3 weeks from now, that should be something determinant factor of this as well. So that would probably decline them, right? So make sure one of the things you're going to spell out in the income verification is that it needs to be permanent, right? Okay. So with each section, we're going to have criteria that needs to be met for that criteria. All right. So I always tell people there's your criteria for what the tenant or the applicant has to meet. But then there's criteria that your screening criteria should meet, okay? So, for example, your screening criteria needs to be, obviously, we're going to talk about, it needs to be fair, right? It cannot be discriminatory. We understand that. And it needs to be consistent, okay? So when you talk to people, you don't want to be saying things like, well, I usually call your previous landlord, or I sometimes will do this, or I sometimes will do that. Your your verbiage when you talk to people, it's we always do this. You don't want to ever come out and try to say that, you sometimes do this, or you may do this, or you may do that. So if your screening criteria says something like to the effect of, we may contact your previous landlord, you want to make it as you will contact their previous landlord, right? Or you will not. You either are or you are not. If there's a reason why you're not going to contact them, or you will contact them, like for example, if you may say something like, well, what I mean is that if they aren't living at their current place, if they weren't with their current landlord for more than a year, then I go and contact their previous. Spell that out in your screening criteria. Say that. Say, if your current landlord or your current housing situation is less than 12 months or less than 24 months or whatever you want to put it at, then we will contact then we will need a previous housing reference as well. So make sure you're going to specify if you're going to go, again, if you're going to kind of go beyond the norm, okay, if you're going to go outside of what you normally would do, explain why, right? Because you haven't been at your place for more than a year. Okay, spell that out in the screening criteria. Okay, so be specific as to what you're doing and make sure. So your screening criteria, therefore, needs to be objective and measurable. It cannot be things that says things like must have good rental history. What does that mean? What that doesn't mean anything. That you can't measure good rental history, or you may as well say must make plenty of money, right? That doesn't make any sense, right? Right. You understand in the income verification part, you have to say must make 3 times the rent or 4 times the rent or whatever. You're actually going to put a mathematical figure to that that's measurable, right? It wouldn't make sense to say you just need to make plenty of money, right? The same thing applies with all the other sections. So make sure you're not saying, you don't want to say things like, we ask that the applicant have good credit. What the heck does good credit mean? Spell that out, okay? So must have a credit rating of X, okay? Or must not have any judgments, or must not have more than X amount of debt, or whatever your criteria is you're going to look at. So we go through things to look at in the credit report, things like that, in one of my other classes, in one of my other videos, through the application processing. So go check that out too. I talk about some things to look at other than just the credit score, if they owe money or things like that. There's a whole bunch of stuff that can be discoverable on that credit report. Spell that stuff out, what you're looking for and what you're going to look at. Okay. So same thing with the criminal history. Make sure you're going to spell out what is it that would cause somebody to be declined, okay? Not saying you just must have clean criminal or no bad criminal history, okay? That doesn't spell anything out. That doesn't mean anything. So be sure you're going to keep it in writing, and then if you change it, document the date and the time that you changed it and save that as a new file. Make sure it's fair, objective, and measurable, and that you're going to be consistent. So you don't want to say things like, I usually do this, or I usually do that. You're going to either always do this, or you're always going to do that. You're never going to do it, right? Okay. You don't want to say things like, applicant may be declined because of da-da. It's either if they don't meet your screening criteria, they don't meet your screening criteria. They will not be declined. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You don't want to make it appear as though you're kind of wishy-washy and you're making exceptions to things, okay? So your screening criteria needs to be hard and steadfast, and this is the minimal requirements that it's going to take for everybody to be able to live at your property, okay? And that's what so that's what that's all about. So you're going to make sure you're going to keep it, try to have it in writing, have a documentation that you're going to do this of, okay? That said, hopefully that was helpful to you. That gives you a little bit of stuff on there. If you found that helpful, go check out my website, jppropertyconsulting.com. I have classes on a whole bunch of different topics, such as fair housing, application screening criteria, and processing procedures of processing applications. We talk about marketing and leasing tactics, different ideas that a lot of the big companies where I come from train their leasing agents for marketing apartments. And then property operations, in general property operations of things of giving you tips and tricks to keep your property running at full optimal performance. To give you a little background of where I'm going to be coming from all this, as opposed to some of these other YouTube videos or other online videos that you may be watching, is my background is in working with the large management companies, the 500, 600, 800 unit apartment communities, with the national companies, where we train our staff the right way to do things, as opposed to a lot of you are kind of from that mom and pop side of things. I always give that example of like the auto dealership thing, where there's the guy putting his car in the driveway with putting his for sale sign on it, and then you've got the Bob's Auto Sales guys, right? I come from the Toyota dealership end of things, if you will, the bigger side of things. And my classes teach you guys from the Bob's Auto Sales, or the guy putting their car in the driveway and the for sale sign on it, teaching you how we do things at the Chrysler and Toyota dealership side of our business, right? So it'd be really interesting to you guys. I think you'll find a lot of good tips and tricks, and a lot of my classes come with forms, downloadable forms that you can use that pertain to each of the classes. So I have documents and that you can download. Again, so if you found that helpful, give me a thumbs up, so like and subscribe, and go check out my website, jppropertyconsulting.com. And thanks for watching, guys. I hope this was helpful.